Starting lineup: Warwick, Lilia, Mel, Swain, Lulu, up against Darius, Kindred, Annie, Vladimir, Seraphine. Rating of the picks for a casual game: Warwick as a top, 9. Lilia in the jungle, 4. Mel as a mid, 7. Swain as a shooter, 8. Lulu in support, 5. Darius as a top. We're gonna bump Darius down from an 8 to a 7 for the casuals. Darius is forced, as we learned during an Eloy episode, to build 3 things instead of 2. Usually when you have champs like Garen, it suffices to focus on ability haste, assassin style, and then also on durability, tank style. But Darius is special because his bleed effect scales off of his attack damage, meaning that Darius actually has to partially be built like Jinx, and like a pure damage dealing marksman, which clearly makes him inferior to Garen in an objective manner for the rookies. It's worth pointing out that all of these ratings and all of these scores for the picks only apply to casual rookie players here in Swiftplay. We're not talking about what Faker would do. That's not the point of this conversation. So, Darius a 7, down from an 8. Kindred in the jungle, 6. Vladimir as a shooter, 1. Seraphine in support, 8. A bit of an unintentional milestone and a little bit of a defining moment thematically, as we now have the opportunity to revisit everything that I've said about Warwick previously, which is very important because he's one of the maybe 3 most popular characters in the video game. And this matchup is really going to hammer down on these 2 kinds of growing and everything that I've said in the past. How playing champions like Warwick is by itself a beautiful start, but how it will gradually handicap you and handicap your mind. And it will limit any ability you have to grow in the game. We see here in this game this Kindred player who's playing a very difficult champion and a very difficult role, who has learned how to manage his fragility and who has learned how to play around his abilities specifically. And we have here a player in this Warwick player who is just relying on natural base stats and has learned nothing. Both players are silver. Both players have about an equal amount of games played, but one person has learned how to use his brain and the other one hasn't. Both champions will end up doing very well in this game, but for completely different reasons. And that is what is going to allow this Goose player here to end up playing in more serious games if he wants to. Moving on. Opening play entirely devoted to this Darius player. In this case, I am not getting the impression that you were inebriated. I am not getting the impression that you were goofing off or drunk. I have spent a lot of time with substances in my life, so I can usually tell whether you're taking something or not. Because I used to be like that myself, and I'm usually right about it. In this case, I'm not getting the impression that this person was smoking anything or drinking anything. We're not going to do a rage segment every episode where we get wildly bent out of shape over individuals in this game. I imagine unless I give up on it, I will meet many thousands of individuals in this game, and there will be something wrong with many of them. But with a rank of silver, you almost have to expect here that this is a person who went through a stroke or a traumatic experience of some kind. It is unbelievable to me that you played enough games to be silver and that you're somehow behaving like this in-game. To get this out of the way, every time you die, you should be ashamed of you. Immediately, the lowest kind of player can be defined and can be set apart and isolated by this very simple trick. Just look at whether they are feeling shame over dying or whether they are trying to shame others over dying. This is the first step past the basic controls in League of Legends. It is the very first milestone that you should get over and that you should get past in your League of Legends experience and League of Legends career. It is the first real step. Do you feel shame over dying, or do you shame others over you dying? There are specific circumstances where people could lure you into your death, or where people could trick you or deceive you or gang up on you. That is clearly not what we are seeing here and clearly not what we are talking about here. Think about this on a more technical level. You're approaching League of Legends as though it is lifting weights. Every time you push up against someone and you keep pushing and clicking harder and pushing harder, and you're hoping that at some point they will fall over. Think of the logical repercussions for the League of Legends universe if that were the case. That clicking on them harder and pushing harder would always mean that you would automatically win. Think about the nature of the game that you would be playing if that were to be true. This cannot exist in video game land as a whole. Any video game at all. And I frequently use the example of Super Mario for this, but inherently and innately, video game land and any video game that was ever crafted is a test of dexterity and intelligence. Never, ever, 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 ever of strength. Never, ever, ever of strength. If video games were to function based on strength, the entire mechanism would come tumbling down. If you either want to get rid of some man energy, or you are not interested in dexterity and intelligence, then get out of here. This is the reason why video games are at times as a hobby considered purely nihilistic, because they lack that masculine virtue of strength, and very frequently video games are inherently associated with degenerate behavior and a complete lack of pride. I do not personally agree with that sentiment at all, but there are some very respectable people in modern day culture who absolutely believe that. And it is because video games inherently lack that pure masculine value of pushing up against each other and outdoing each other in pure strength. If you're looking for that, go to the gym, but get out of here. It is significantly disrespectful to these other 4 people that you're intentionally fueling the enemy and their gold pile. You cannot do a better job of turning this completely unskilled Dutch boy in this Warwick player into a killing machine, and like a bad dream, of course, you know it, right as rain, this Warwick player is absolutely going to use this power to start prowling around and bullying other people. and you're giving him that power intentionally, and then you're getting mad at the rest, while in reality, you're just buying the people who come after us a dagger and a gun. That's what you're doing. Not only is it not our fault in these 4 other players, it is specifically your and absolutely purely your fault that anything past this gets out of control. How have you played up to silver if you don't know that if you play in this manner without really goofing around? What exactly, I would love to know, is your win-loss ratio? What is your win-loss? When you think the game is just about rubbing up against each other until you're dead, how should you play this then? What should you do when you are incapable of overcoming your lane adversary, of overcoming your matchup? I am unskilled with Annie. I have it all the time. You see it in this very game. You'll see it again. You can use the turret. You can absolutely use the turret because the turret is as strong as 3 champions combined. So, if you stand underneath your turret, you will practically be 4 champions. Even if this Mel player were way stronger than me, and this Warwick player were way stronger than you, there is no way, no matter what, that he will be able to just take down a turret with you standing under it. You may have noticed there are several things that you can strategically do when you are meeting an enemy and when you are confronted with adversaries. One of them is march ahead and push forward. There are other options than that. You're not obligated to only push forward. Pushing forward is not inherently a good thing if you are getting completely destroyed. You should not be pushing forward. Even a person who cannot meet their matchup can perfectly well hold a lane by playing defensively. Why is this so difficult to understand for people? I see it even in ranked all the time. You people are so emotionally limited and handicapped. You only have 2 modes for everything. You're binary. Either it's a 1 value, which means that you completely own your enemy and you're walking all over him and you're accomplishing everything, or it is a 0 value, and then you just start crying, melt down, cannot handle anything, and you completely collapse. Why? There are many, many, many more ways to deal with things than that. You can stagnate, you can tactical retreat, you can hold them off, you can stagger them, and at heart, this is really why we ended up playing Annie. Is just I cannot allow this type of stuff to go on in the mid lane. We're gonna have this Vladimir interaction here with Swain. Vladimir built off of the strongest fantasy ID of all time, Dracula vampires, introduced to the world by Bram Stoker, who very unfortunately, like is so frequently the case throughout history with Dutch-speaking people, took his great brilliance somewhere else, to the UK, entirely crediting the UK for his work, which ended up being, again, the most important fantasy contribution of all time. Count Dracula. Everybody loves vampires. Now Vladimir is a trash character. Why is Vladimir a trash character? Well, He expends health in the same way that other characters expend mana. He's the ultimate high-risk champion because when he's operating with nearly no health whatsoever, he gets a massive AP boost through his passive, which means that when Vladimir is low health, he can almost instantly zap you. Now, I have seen Vladimir in 35 different games around the casuals. I have not seen him dominate a single time. That is 0 out of 35. This has a lot to do with the fact that health mechanics and damaging with health abilities and expending health as a resource makes things incredibly complicated, since Vladimir tends to play continuously at lower health, working with Crimson Pact and this mechanic with Sanguine Pool. He becomes invulnerable for a short duration, but it costs him a portion of his current health to activate it, which means that it inherently forces him to be at lower health. Almost all casuals have trouble managing their life pool as it is. Their actual life pool, like the life pool of Heimerdinger, or the life pool of Darius, is approximately 10 or 15 times more simplistic and more straightforward than what is going on with Vladimir. With Vladimir, everything is all over the place, and you never know how much you actually have left because of this entire workaround mechanic of regen invulnerability and especially expending health as a resource instead of mana. Now, how do you know that this is a trash character? That is to say, as much as you're ever going to know of anybody? Well, here's how you know. If people were to go and play Orianna, they would also be horrible at it. If people were to go and play Twitch, in most cases, they would also be horrible at it. If people were to go and play Akali, in many cases, they would also be horrible at playing Akali. Just like with Vladimir, and you would see nearly no success. The only difference is that there are extremely high-end examples of Akali, Twitch, and Orianna paying off on the highest possible level and completely turning games around. I have never seen Vladimir being a popular pick or ban in a pro game. I have never seen Vladimir succeed on the lowest level in a casual game. I have never seen Vladimir succeed anywhere. And at this point, even if he was good, it is just way too few and far between, and it takes way too much time for it to come out and show up. People love to use that phrase like, "Oh, Garen is trash." It's one of those phrases that are thrown around all the time. In this rare case, it is actually applicable. If there were 2 or 3 champions that you should avoid in League of Legends, let it be Vladimir and Gangplank. And that is a very short list of characters that I've never seen succeed, even once, on any level at all. There are few top laners who fall off, but there are a couple of junglers who really do. Lilia's one of them. We have this beautiful little interaction here with Mel signaling that the dragon is alive and going to learn the hard way that sometimes it's better to give up on jungle objectives. And I've said this very recently. I believe it was Annie episode 2. Mel is a character that seems to have clearly better standard poke tools than mages, and her fundamental most simple spell is really very solid. But other than that basic ability and that basic spell, seems like a character who is going to have so much time keeping up with others when it comes to the clutch. You see that complete destruction warlock, Annie, as far as short and mid-range is concerned, an absolute fire demon. and a bunch of bursting tools that I just do not see with Mel. Zap you down like it's nothing when push comes to shove. And when I have any kind of way to just get as close as I want, whatever the reason may be, something that I can afford so few times in lane because of the minion flow and because of the risk of a jungler ganking me, but when I can get close at will, you are so dead. And Tiberius has to be one of the most feared ultimates for the casuals. In terms of just not knowing what to do. I mean, what would you rather face? That Lux laser beam ultimate or that massive bear chasing you around? You know you would freak out. This Vladimir player is gonna very quickly pull it off, then ultimately succumb to that Swain ultimate. Swain, arguably the deepest character in League universe from a lore standpoint. With just Trinity Force and the Collector, you already get that absolute shredding power on Kindred. Nothing but that simplistic auto attack here. And as we see very frequently from this type of Lilia player, you get that meaningless sidestep as though that is going to change anything. The attempt to over-intellectualize your circumstances and the situation that is in front of you. Overthinking. The Swain ult, Demon Flare, really showcasing that mastery over dark magic and demonic power. You shoot out powerful beams of magic that damage enemies. You're also draining health from nearby enemies and replenishing your own health pool. If you kill anyone while your ult is up as Swain, the ability lasts longer. This is absolutely terrifying in a team fight and can potentially turn the entire tide. The longer the fight goes on, the more powerful Swain becomes with his ult and his crowd control. It empowers him in extended battles, making him a beast as the fight drags on. Jinx, the most overused character in the video game, Swain, the most underused character in the video game. And for some reason, apparently with modern day young boys, something must have gone very wrong, because this character in Swain that represents a supreme ruler capable of navigating the power of a demon is somehow considered not cool or not the thing to do. Swain, one of those characters who could even top lane. He can get that tanky with his regen. He could top, mid, shoot, and support. Everything but jungle. Final play here. Seraphine shows off that incredible, useful kit. We are allowed a glance at what a combination of Trinity Force and the Collector can do. Two very basic, simple items for this Kindred player, just making the absolute most out of that auto attack. Kindred really not a character with unusually powerful spells, mostly just auto attacking his way through it. This Dutch boy playing Warwick with an inflated ego because you beat up this living pinata Darius player, gonna get absolutely obliterated. Swain diving in without any kind of tact whatsoever, winning this very lengthy exchange because it's Swain. Eventually I have my very rare kill steal moment, and I lob that disintegrate as far as I can. Perhaps the best looking fireball in the video game. This Mel player, one of those very many people who just enjoys running off to nowhere. By now that Kindred auto attack has truly become mortifying. And this is where Kindred as a jungler really shine. This Darius player is going to mouth off a lot and make a lot of noise, but ultimately not do a thing while this tower goes down. So me and this Kindred player are going to take care of Warwick at the base, breaking it all up into smaller bits and pieces. Let's look at this game. Let's look at the champs and how they ended up interacting with each other as individuals. We have this Darius player to whom we've devoted an entire segment, and I'm not going to talk about it anymore. We have this Goose individual, Geese, known to be perhaps the most combat-ready, domesticated birds that you could find, typically used to be kept at military stations and military bases in real life, because they would be able to alert soldiers in case of an emergency, much like dogs. Kindred has a pretty useful ultimate ability that can have a significant impact, but he's one of those characters all in all, with very lengthy spell descriptions, but very little to the actual spells. Very auto-attack heavy champ. Kindred is a very difficult champion to play. He's primarily considered to be a jungler. It reaches a very long time before that long-ranged auto-attack pays off. All in all, if you want to oversimplify things in order to understand them better, Kindred has the defensive stats that enable him to jungle. He's one of the only champions that has a ranged auto-attack and also has high defensive stats that allow him to whittle down drakes and void grubs. The entire point of playing Kindred in this way is to capitalize on his ranged auto attack, which would give you a massive advantage in the very long term over characters like Warwick. It is a sneaky long-term plan to have an extra functional misfortune on your team, but then with much more sustain and durability. I have seen this happen. I have seen Kindred played like this a total of maybe 30 times, and this is the second time that it's worked out. Because the problem is that Warwick, for example, is stronger than Kindred at nearly any point before you get very heavy weaponry. If you ever at any point run into a jungler like Warwick earlier in game on Kindred, you will get completely destroyed in a truly disheartening manner. It is a very tough position to be in because you can never face your opponent early in game as Kindred. More than anything else, this Kindred player had very high map awareness. Unfortunately, what you're doing here, as beautiful as it is highly reliant on your adversaries being idiots. In other words, this is not sustainable. In other words, this will never work in higher ranked. This is completely obsolete as a battle strat. Higher up the ladder. Beautiful play though, amazing team spirit from this Goose, and clearly the best player in the game. Then we have myself, who had a lot of timing problems, but managed to be able to throw a beautiful combo, and I also managed to avoid player deaths, which is very important in terms of gold balance. Then we have this hip-hop inspired Vladimir player who was the second worst player on Team Red. What you're doing here playing Vlad in shooter will never last long term. It's kind of clown stuff openly. I don't think that you yourself would deny that it's clown stuff. Overall, you were quick with the controls, and you had some good reflexes. Then we have this Seraphine player who seems to have a very good understanding of the game, playing an incredibly useful champion. And that's a very dangerous combination. It is something that I myself would not immediately consider doing, but it is definitely going to win you a lot of games. Although, if you have the talent of this Seraphine player, you should absolutely play mid and not support. Take it from me, I've been there. Then we have this Warwick player. I played Warwick myself too at some point, when I was getting started. Warwick is fine, he's a pretty cool champ, but maybe it is time that you step out there and try an actual champion in the sense that there's any technical complexity to any other champion. Maybe it is time to take the little training wheels off for you. instead of continuously leaning on this champion whose entire kit is just being super tough and clawing at things. It's very sad and unfortunate, but we have to notice every time and experience every time that Warwick players typically have very poor personalities and just lean on that massive natural power in order to belittle other players and other people. And they can have the illusion of being really tough and strong because of those freebie natural stats. I would really like to avoid taking a dump on the Warwick fan base and the Warwick player base, but if we never see anything else from them, I may eventually have to start associating Warwick with sad and pathetic things. I would really prefer not to, though. It would be fun if we could avoid that, because Warwick is a great starter champion, just not past the training phase. Then we have Lilia. It's probably the most endearing that we see out of biological women in League of Legends. This deep attraction to Bambi and fairy magic and pretty things. It's kind of dark in a way. You would almost think that the people who are behind League of Legends and part of the Microsoft team have this fixated idea to deliberately make hyper-feminine champions like Lilia and hyper-masculine champions like Sion extra weak, and then make gender-confusing champions like Vi extra strong. You would almost start getting that impression, right? Because these women are really being punished hard for going with this hyper-feminine character. To be honest, man, if I'm breaking it down for this Lilia player, I think you played well and I think you bought useful items. I think the game just punishes your champion. Lilia very urgently needs to be buffed. Very urgently. Wildly underpowered champion by nature. Then we have this Mel player. You are good and capable, but you have to avoid running off to Narnia. You're going into the jungle for safety way too many times. Looking for refuge somewhere where you will never find it. Then we have the Swain player. In this game, kind of forced to go F it mode. He's soloing this Vladimir player and this very competent Seraphine player most of the time, because Lulu is just abandoning him. I think you have a great strategical mind by selecting Swain as a shooter. I think that compared to champions like Jinx, that could win you massive games if you consistently would play Swain as a shooter, because you would always avoid all of those deaths. People will push back against it heavily though, because there is a real ADC culture that I myself am kind of afraid to touch. Starting to play Heimerdinger in bottom lane, starting to play Swain in bottom lane. It could definitely be good, I have considered it myself. But people are very, very, very rigid, specific, difficult about the ADC 4th-player position on the team. Then we have this Lulu player. You were one of the worst players in the game. You were the worst player on Team Blue. Lulu is almost always a clown. It is that very weird mind trick that forever works, that you're trying to do something so gentle as playing a pure support caster, but then simultaneously just always F it up. This player also had some connection problems. Very interesting duality going on in this game. It was a very cool thing to see Warwick and Kindred drift apart and both dominate at certain points, but just for completely different reasons. Kindred for such a good reason and Warwick for such a bad reason. We have also attached the Kindred perspective to this video file because I think this guy had amazing map awareness and it should be celebrated. Taking a look at the scoreboard here. The fact that you're going with Ionian here shows that you understand the game already on a different level than most. This is a person with an unusual perspective on the game, who for some reason is still here, and will probably go on to do great things. Yeah, in the cult of the Ruined King, everybody is going Ruined King, except for the people who should actually go Ruined King, of course. Relatively speaking, Trinity Force is poor bang for your buck. It is a very sensible and useful item in many ways. It does a little bit of everything, and in that sense, it is an item where you cannot go wrong if you get it. But specifically because of the fact that it is an item that is truly useful all across the board, where you essentially cannot get it without getting your money's worth or without it fitting in to some extent. Probably exactly for that reason, they made sure that Trinity Force is in no way overpowered, to put it mildly. You notice that very strange price tag that it has, pointing to the artificial nature of the price tag. There are other items that are much cheaper, that hit much harder, because they want to make sure that not everybody just simply goes Trinity Force and then the whole game looks the same for everyone. In this very rare case where you're playing a champ with spells that are very limited and you're really not an ability cooldown Andy, Blade of the Ruined King is actually much better here for attack speed. I frequently say the same thing for Jax, and this is an even better example than Jax. Because Ruined King is going to hit much harder with those auto attacks, give you much more bang for your buck. And you don't really need those cooldowns anyway, because you're not a cooldown champion. We get exceptionally smart behavior in this entire crew when it comes to boots. Usually people do a bunch of idiotic stuff with boots, not so much here. And this is something that I've pointed out about a month ago, that Spirit Visage was becoming a cult item. And many of these things, these build patterns, and what people end up getting in the shop is just based on fictional beliefs and blindly following others rather than actually thinking for yourself. You're going up against Darius here in the whole game, and you're getting Spirit Visage now. This doesn't surprise me. This has been going on for some time. Where people just end up getting Spirit Visage because it's in so many online guides that they automatically feel attracted to it, even though it doesn't do jack for them. Really points here to how weak Lilia is in many ways, that you're buying very smart here. These items are very mature items, relatively speaking. I would have probably still gone with the hourglass, but this is already way more mature than what most people would do. Most people would get like something like magic pen boots or even berserker greaves and blow all their money on that. Or plated steel caps. So you're buying really smart here compared to other people, and you're still ending up with terrible results. Moving on.
Are you imitating me? Choose 30 seconds until minions spawn.
My teeth.
Minions have spawned.
Chase to your heart's content. Go, Wolf! Now, Wolf! Now!
That was a good chase! My turn!
Chase to your heart's content. your heart's content.